So this season of the podcast, if you can fairly call it a season given how intermittent it's been, sorry about that. I guess that we're a monthly show now? Anyway, this season of the podcast, it started with me telling you that I'd lost my sense of place in the internet creative community. It had once been my home, but it was my home no longer. I still visit. I still love the people that live there, but it's not for me. I go there on holidays now, and I dream of getting to a place where I never return and only send letters from abroad. And I ended the last episode by saying that I was beginning to find a new sense of place, a new sense of purpose, a new home. And I still am. I'm still finding that place. I know roughly where it is, and I'm drawing up the preliminary blueprints, but I'll be honest, today's episode was recorded literally minutes after the interview with Jessica Parker. I walked out of the Cafe Killam in Portsmouth. They make a great coffee soda. And I went up the street to the West End Theatre, and in between, I didn't even turn my microphone off. So, I guess I'm saying there might not be a lot of forward movement in the subtext. But if I were to summarize where we've been and still are, I'd say that in the aftermath of my breakup with the internet, something I really needed to reckon with was how my sense of artistic worth had been tied up in views and comments and likes. I had learned, as my work got weirder and my audience dwindled, to value the quality of the likes and the comments and not the quantity, but I was still drinking from the same poisoned river, I just had a fancier cup. So talking with Jessica had helped me reframe some of my old ideas. We talked about less obvious ways that creative skills transfer to work in the nonprofit sector. We learned to feel better about networking. But I think I got a little bit ahead of myself. There's value in creative skills, yes, but there's also just value in creativity. What I'm saying is, if the last episode was about how a theater major could make a good CEO or whatever, this episode would like to add that a theater major also makes a pretty good theater major. There are things that art can accomplish by itself.
I'm Catherine Stewart, and I'm the Associate Artistic Director at New Hampshire Theatre Project.
So yeah, that's Catherine Stewart, our guest today. I met her while I was on a scavenger hunt, which is such a weird thing to say. It was a Leadership Seacoast thing. We were walking around the West End of Portsmouth talking to people involved in the local arts scene. And her presentation about the New Hampshire Theatre Project, it really resonated with me. Because it sounded like the work that I was starting on for this season of the podcast and the work that they were starting on for their next season of theater really lined up rather nicely. And I was way more right about that than I could have possibly known. Let's start with where we are right now.
Yeah.
This is, technically it's called the West End Theatre, right?
Yeah, so the building is called the West End Studio Theatre, and it was called that because 3 companies were actually housed in this space. However, New Hampshire Theatre Project is now the sole tenant of this space. And so we have lots of conversations about, do we keep the name West, or does this whole building become New Hampshire Theatre Project? So, but yeah, technically we are at 959 Islington Street in the West End of Portsmouth, and it's a small 50-seat black box theatre that houses our company.
Define a term for me. Applied theatre.
Yeah, I can do that. So applied theatre, I'll start off by saying there is no official defined term.
Sure.
And not everybody doing this kind of work in the world uses that term. So I'll just say that first. But
sure.
For me, applied theatre is exactly the same as applied mathematics or applied physics. It's the idea of putting theatre teaching, theatre pedagogy, the skills of theatre making, and putting those skills towards solving some kind of problem, just like you would do in applied mathematics. So mathematical theory, fixing a real world problem. So what do I mean by that? Applied theatre means that depending on who you're building the work with, or who the community is that is saying they want a challenge or they need some help, you design a project that meets those needs. So perhaps there's a project that is to help people who are 70 and over feel less isolated. A theatre maker would come in and, using their skills in writing, directing, acting, putting on a performance, but it doesn't have to have piece of performance at the end of it either. It could just be all the great community-based things we do as theatre makers, learning to look people in the eye, learning to say what we truly feel, learning to understand human emotions and what it is to be human. That's really what theatre is. It's a mirror to society. It's understanding who are we and what do we do on this planet. Mm-hmm. And so we would use that with that group of 70-year-olds to address those issues of isolation. And that could be done in a number of different ways. Like I said, might be putting on a work, it might be creating new work, or it might just be opportunities to interact with one another in a theatrical setting.
I love that so much because obviously you think about the way that arts can impact people and the way that the arts can be a mirror to society. But in this case, it's more than a mirror. Like, it's a mirror that talks back to you.
It is. I've never thought of it like that. I love that.
Yeah, it's reflecting and it's also pushing. And it's such an interesting idea. And it's just something that I immediately want to be in the room with those 70-year-olds and see what they were. At the risk of putting too fine a point on it, what I mean by that mirror that talks back to you remark is not some kind of fantastical Snow White type deal, but I'm saying, a TV show, a song, a movie, these are forms of art that often reflect society, but very rarely stop and say, hey, do you see what we just did there? Did you connect this theme with that verse? That kind of explicitness and transparency is something that the New Hampshire Theatre Project traffics in regularly in a variety of ways, which we will hear about. And let me tell you, dear listener, I am very much on board with that kind of thing. I used to think that art should not be allowed to explain itself. I used to think that the little plaques they have at museums next to paintings that tell you what it means, I used to think that was cheating. Then I started putting things on YouTube. Now, I think that art really, really has to explain itself and take every opportunity to do so.
It's a mirror, and a mirror is all it can be, a reflection of something we're missing. And
there's a current theme this year for the year, and what's that about? Tell me about that.
So, in my new position as Associate Artistic Director, I've had a hand in constructing our season. So we have a main stage season that runs at our theatre. It opens in October of 2019 and will run all the way to June 2020. And in order to tie all the work we do, because our main stage productions are not all that we do, but it's a large part of it, in order to tie all of our programming together, we're looking at a theme called Can One Person Make a Difference? And there's lots and lots of ways to think about that. Mm-hmm. We are living in divisive times. We are living in challenging, interesting times where we are progressing and regressing in kind of equal measures. It feels like every day. And so what we wanted to do was put together a season of classic plays, new adaptations, and brand new works that really address what does it mean for one person to stand up and do something. And that idea of, I don't need to fix this, that person over there will fix this. Or what do we in our own lives have control over that sometimes we feel like we don't. So that idea of can one person make a difference is going to kind of globally touch everything we do at New Hampshire Theatre Project for the 2019-2020 season.
That's a very complicated question, right? Because I feel like, and now more than ever, I feel like people's idea of how they can impact the world, it's changing. I mean, the internet obviously has made a lot possible, but at the same time, to some people it seems like just like an energy vacuum, it sucks up all the slacktivism and it gives back nothing. Then at the same time too, there's so much like social and political upheaval. So it's a great time for that question. When you talk about new work, I guess my question is, how much new work is there on that topic already? I don't know about the timeline when it comes to theater, how long it takes people to process, like how long does it take to process the election of 2016 and create a play around it? How much work is there?
Yeah. So the thing that I love about theatre is theatre can be immediate. That we can be making work about the current time right now, and theatre artists are processing that work, and we'll be doing that with one of our pieces. We are, as a company, are devising, which means that there's not necessarily a hierarchy to a director and a writer and a performer. It means that we're all in the room working together. We're making a devised piece called Anthropocene, which is the term given to the age that we're currently living in, the era where humans have had the most effect on the world that we live in. And we'll be creating that work this year and throughout the year. It's totally right now. It's totally immediate. We will be pulling from headlines, from stories, and making that now and staging it now. But we are also bringing Kate Hamill's Pride and Prejudice to the stage in November of 2019. And that story was written several hundred years ago and still feels very immediate. What Lizzie Bennet as a character goes through trying to find some kind of connection in the world is just as important to us now in the post-Me Too era as it was in Regency England.
How does the process of selecting all of these new and old works go? Are you kind of just relying on each other's knowledge of, what would be good?
Yes, there is a little bit of that. So we have an open submissions policy that means that anyone can approach New Hampshire Theatre Project with an idea for a work or a play that we should do, because we believe that being responsive to our community is also part of our job as a theatre company. It does not work if we tuck ourselves in a building and decide to do everything and we don't listen to what the community wants or needs. And so we have an open submissions policy, which means we're considering brand new plays that have never been staged or works that have been staged thousands of times. We have a programming committee as well that's based with board members and resident artists, and we go through a period of deciding looking at all those submissions and then deciding what we think best fits the season. How do we have a balanced season? How do we touch on all of the points of can one person make a difference? It was really important to me to talk about diversity and equality and race in this season. It was really important for me to talk about gender issues. It was really important for me to talk about the environment, all with that idea of can one person make a difference. But it was also really important for us to make sure that we were supporting the voices of women and people of colour in our season as well, and that we want to make sure that we are putting on stage a reflection of the community that we want to be living in. And so all of those factors go into the programme committee's decisions, and then finally the final decisions between Genevieve, Rachel and myself to figure out what a year looks like.
Genevieve, by the way, is the founding artistic director of the theater, and ordinarily I wouldn't be that concerned about you guys understanding the leadership structure of this one particular theater, but I actually just interviewed Genevieve the other day for a future episode, so good to know. Put it in your back pocket.
Do you start to accumulate possible work before you know what the theme is, or do you start with a theme so the theme suggests itself?
The theme suggests itself, absolutely. We realize as we're talking what we're being drawn to in that period. In this last season that we've just had, we were really kind of looking at a kind of twisted history. What does it mean to turn some things that we know historically to be true around on their head? So Men on Boats, the story of Powell going down the Colorado River for the first time with an expedition of white males. There's a great play out there by Jacqueline Backhouse that says all of those men have to be played by women. And that was in our season this year. So those kind of plays. And again, that twisted history came out of us looking at plays we really wanted to put on, rather than saying, oh, well, we need to make sure that we're talking about this issue and let's shoehorn in the work. The work of theatre, the great works of theatre come first before a theme.
It's interesting. It must be interesting to see because you talk about art being a mirror of society. By looking at what people are writing, what people are working on, and by considering what people wrote hundreds of years ago, you can sort of both maybe get a sense of where we are, where we're going. You know, I think a lot of the time art is a little bit ahead of everybody else. People tend to look back at things a few years later and say, oh, this person, whether they knew it or not,
Right.
they knew where we were headed.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, I guess I'm asking you, like, what's going to happen in the next 10 years?
Look into my crystal ball. Well, I think absolutely. If we're doing our job right at New Hampshire Theatre Project, we are doing that. We are looking at where we are at now, where we have been in order to go forward. So that's also why it's important for us to put the kind of community on stage that we want to be seeing as well.
You know what's a great term that I just learned? Prefigurative politics. This is essentially a form of protest where you act according to the rules of the society that you hope to create rather than the society that you have. It tends to get results. I would say a recent example is the pronoun name tag. The linguistic battlefields of gender fluidity in general can be understood this way, and I think that's actually pretty helpful for the otherwise progressive grammar sticklers out there still tripping over this stuff. I am not a prescriptivist by any means. I like Shakespeare and I like rap music, and I think the reshaping of our language is a powerful tool that we can and should use. But I'm sympathetic to the nerds out there. Pronoun agreement is hard to learn in 9th grade English. That's a hard-won battle, and now you gotta just let it go? Well, yes. But also, no, not really. And as always, context is pretty key here. And really, it's not that hard. And I guess, now that I think about it, I'm actually not that sympathetic to the grammar nerds out there. But anyway, Catherine still hasn't answered my very fair question about what's gonna happen to our society in the future.
I hope if the works that are speaking to us are anything to go by, what we're looking at is a more just and equal and fair society in the future. But it takes active participation from a society in order for that to happen. But I think by even just coming to the theatre, that's you being civically engaged. That's you joining in with your community. That's you sitting next to someone that you may never meet in your everyday life, and being able to share a live experience with them, something that makes you think a little differently.
I'd like to point out that 2 of the paths this podcast has suggested to you for making a difference are 1, talking about things, and 2, going to the theater. Not very difficult, right? Okay, let's interrogate that for a second. The question of can one person make a difference has been on my mind for a while now. And it has probably affected the podcast for longer than I realized. It's a question that it feels like a lot of people are starting to ask. My favorite show right now is called Broken Bread. It's on Hulu. It's a show about food and social issues, and it's hosted by Chef Roy Choi, so it's like all of my favorite things rolled into one, and it's perfect, and I wouldn't change a frame of it. Chef Roy's position is pretty clear. One person can make a difference, and you have a moral obligation to do so. The people that he profiles are very motivated and very busy, and the work that they're doing to help others and the testimonials that he gathers from people they've helped is pretty inarguable. The only thing that's really in contention then is sort of the meta level of the question, which, yeah, can one person make a difference by talking about how one person can make a difference? In other words, is Roy Choi's show going to itself have a positive impact? Is the New Hampshire Theatre Project going to? Is this podcast going to? How do you know? Catherine is trying to follow through.
And because what's so important to us is that community dialogue, through most of our productions at various times, there's opportunities for the community to talk. So that might be a pre-show or a post-show discussion, a panel or a workshop or a class based around the work that's on the main stage. And so that means that person who you were sitting next to, who maybe ideologically you're at an opposite end of a spectrum, age-wise, socially, politically, economically, whatever that is, we're trying to create opportunities for you to have a dialogue with them because we think the theatre is a safe space to do that.
Yeah, how does that go normally? The community discussions.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It really is brilliant. It's my favorite part of the job is hearing people talk about the work that they're seeing, what it's made them think, and then to have someone else disagree. Because I feel like often in the workplace, or perhaps at church, or in our social circles, we're not led to believe that disagreeing with someone is okay. You know, where it becomes really antagonistic and you're kind of butting heads. That's all we see in the media, is people going at one another. But what I am able to see in the theatre is when someone disagrees, as theatre makers, if we can facilitate the conversation to make sure that it's respectful and honest and open, then what we see is people being able to disagree but still listen to one another.
I would think, maybe this is naive, but I would think a lot of that almost just happens on its own by virtue of being in a theater. I feel like theaters have, like, the space is like it's a very, like, sacred space. It feels good when you're in a theater. It must not be nice to come to work every day in one.
It kind of is. It is. It can be really amazing. It does feel peaceful. It does feel sacred. It's very lucky to walk into these spaces, because again, how often are we in communal spaces these days that are truly open? And I know we have a front door that can sometimes be a barrier to people, and we have programs that cost money. But I see my job here really being about accessibility and ensuring that we are creating an open avenue for anybody and everybody into this space, so that we all get to experience that kind of sanctuary.
There is something very immediate about it, very personal. There's actually a person in front of you who's doing this. It's not an image on a screen. And so I guess one thing I'd never really thought about was this idea of bringing those tools and that kind of magic to bear on, like, fixing society's problems. But it works. It makes so much sense.
Oh, cool. I'm glad it makes sense to you, because sometimes I'd say, well, theatre can save the world, and people look at me like, what are you talking about? Because sometimes the only theatre we experience is a terrible reading of Shakespeare in a history class where it's read off the page and it doesn't come alive, and or maybe you're seeing another shiny, big Broadway musical that, again, just can be fun and exciting but doesn't feel accessible because of where we live in the country or what we are interested in. But what I love about theatre is that theatre can be those things and a million other things as well. It can be something that you don't even know is theatre. You're walking down the street and there's a performer doing something, or you come into a space like ours for a contemporary play or a classical play, or we can again be out and about experiencing theatre in the real world as well. Theatre can take so many different shapes that it really, we kind of have a piece of theatre for every problem, every ailment that we have. We can find the piece of text or the movement or the words or the performance or the visual design that lets us just sit with that feeling for a while, think about it, and then maybe think about, do we want to change it?
I want to change things. I do. I want to make a positive difference. And I want to change myself to be the kind of person who's better suited to make a positive difference. I want to change the way that I think about my creative work. I want to change the way that I create things. I've always changed the way that I create things, really. I've never edited this podcast the same way twice. But I want to change the way that I change. I want to change with focus. I want to center my changing around new ideas, around a more specific purpose. I just realized that basically what I'm saying is I want to change the way that I change in order to better create change, which sounds ridiculous, but it's pretty accurate. It's funny, the method that I've been going about trying to find a new path is I've been looking everywhere. I've been doing everything. I've been really busy
for the last couple of months. Which again, part of the reason podcast not very frequent. But it's been really fun. I've been meeting with people who work in a variety of issue areas, using a variety of approaches, and it's been really fun and really gratifying to see where all these paths might lead me. It's funny though, all the paths keep making stops at the same places. Like Catherine told me when I said I just come from interviewing Jessica Parker, she told me that they know each other.
I sit on it was the Greater Seacoast Coalition to End Homelessness, now called Home for All, with Jessica.
Small world, right? Like almost alarmingly so.
Sometimes theatre's place is just asking the tricky question, and asking it in a way that hasn't been asked before. So whether that's making a performance installation that people experience someplace in the town, or we put on a play in our season that addresses homelessness. We'll be bringing back It's a Wonderful Life at Christmas this year, the radio play version by Joe Landry, starring Peter Josephson as George Bailey. And what George Bailey is doing, one of the biggest things that changes when he decides he doesn't want to be around anymore, and Clarence grants that wish and he observes the world without him, that one person, we realize that the difference that George Bailey makes is bringing affordable housing to Bellows Falls, to the town that he's living in.
I never thought
that
affordable housing, which has been an issue on this podcast quite a bit, I never thought it would connect it through It's a Wonderful Life.
It's
Amazing.
A Wonderful Life. That is what he does. That is what George Bailey and his father are doing, is essentially the Buildings and Loans company that they work for is ensuring that people can buy a property and live in their own place. And when George Bailey isn't around anymore, a big developer comes on in and the whole town disintegrates into an economic mess.
This is everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Oh
and so we can have a fun family show that we all know, that we all love, and gives us all those warm feelings at winter, and really come and enjoy it. But what we're doing on top of that is adding that extra question of, oh, wait a minute, who's the George Bailey of our town? And can one person make a difference? Or do we all have to do something in order to make a difference? In order to finally address this issue of affordable housing in the Seacoast, what do we do? And so partnering with organisations like Crossroads or Home for All, the network of organisations that work together to have really meaningful conversations about that. And not just conversation, but try and move it to action. How can a theatre organisation tie in with our civic leaders so that actual public policy is made as well?
Before all of this started, I thought about my creativity as this private thing. This thing that I had for now that was mostly just for me and that would someday probably, by practical necessity, be crushed out of me. My real-world responsibilities would gradually claim more and more of my time, and then one day I would, put down the crayon and never pick it up again. I wasn't happy about that. I thought that was what was going to happen. And then I talked to Jessica, and I started to see a new way out. Here was a role model for me, who had similar creative skills and who put them to work in unexpected ways, helping the homeless. Put down the crayon, pick up a pen, but use it in essentially the same way. It was really inspiring to hear from her, and to realize that these skills that I had, that I really just used for my own little private projects, it could be useful and valuable elsewhere to others. But then here comes Catherine, who still has the crayon but uses it as effectively as the pen. She's drawing a line directly from the theater to the State House in crayon. I'm really starting to regret the crayon metaphor because it infantilizes creativity, but I don't think it's unfair given the incorrect way that I thought about creativity before as this thing that would go away with age. I think Catherine recognized at this point in our conversation that I was a little tangled up in all this. And she set me straight.
No, it doesn't have to go away with age. Yes, it is valuable. And hey, it can be both, crayon and pen. It can be both at the same time.
What do theatre makers do? Or how does what we do make us able to address things in the real world, right? Because theatre making's so based in fantasy. It's make-believe. Mm-hmm. It's for the grown-up who didn't want to stop playing make-believe at the age of 4. We just keep on going. But what that means is we are able to visualize worlds in our heads and then produce them in the real world. A super important skill for innovation.
Yeah.
Seeing something and then being able to turn it into a real thing. Creative problem solving. We need this to happen over on stage left and we need this to happen on stage right, and it has to happen at the same time. But how do we do that so that an audience can see that and understand it? Creative problem solving. Super important for the world. Communication skills, looking one another in the eye. Good actors can't do their job without looking in the eyes of their fellow actors and their audience. Speaking clearly, communicating clearly. Those are also skills that we need in order to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And so every time I think about something that a theatre maker trains to do and then inherently does in their job, I can see that real world application. And that's then when I go back to, that's why training in the arts and in theatre in particular is so important. Whether you're 4 or 14 or 34, staying connected to theatre and what theatre can do helps us be a more well-rounded person, as well as gives us something fun to do on a Friday night.
Again, this is one of those things that maybe other people already know, but I really needed to hear.
So you are also a playwright,
I
right?
am, yeah.
What are you working on right now?
I am working on a play about the fashion industry. It's called Threads. And so the work that I typically do is usually based in the real world, mm-hmm. and is usually about, again, a given topic that I want to challenge. And so this is looking at the environmental and social cost of the textile industry. So in the world of fast fashion, who really ends up paying for that $10 t-shirt? Because there's someone in the world who hasn't been paid a fair wage, and there's somewhere in the world that the chemicals used in making that t-shirt are decimating the environment. And so the play follows the life of Dani Ra, who is a fashion mogul. And she is at the point of retiring and letting go her company. However, you learn that she's actually being pushed out for something new, something younger, something trendier, and something that's going to ask a few less questions about the practices of making the clothes in that textile company. And so it's really a play about greed and about making something, actually. What do we do? What are we here on this planet to do? Are we here to contribute in some way just for ourselves, or do we have a kind of greater responsibility? I've actually been working on this play for at least 2 years now, and in a variety of different ways. I work with an arts organisation called Arts in Reach that offers mentoring and arts experiences for teen girls. And 2 years ago, I worked with them on a short project that kind of let me do some of my initial research in partnership with Fashion Revolution. And so the idea has been taking over, but I didn't have the characters for a while. It took me a while to find the place, the people, because a play can't just be, don't wear clothes and bat someone over the head with it. Like, that's not interesting. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants a lecture when they come to the theatre.
Right.
So you've got to still find the human story, the human connection, the characters that are interacting, that you either hate or fall in love with or whatever. You've got to find what's important to those people. And then when you're a playwright like me that tries to weave socially conscious ideas into their work, I have got to be careful about how and where I do that. So fill myself up with research, try and forget most of it, write a story about real people, and then come back and see if I can add in some more of those details again that give us a more understanding of how much water there is in our production, or how many clothes we throw away, or whether textile recycling is even the best way forward anyways.
So how far along are you with the writing of this?
I have a full draft, a full first draft. So essentially what I do after I have that is I go back into like I said, a research period for a very little while. The story's not fully set. I don't quite know all the twists and turns yet of all the characters there, so there's still some good work to do. However, I'm aiming for a deadline at least of September. So I feel a little far away from it, but I gotta keep moving, gotta keep working.
Yeah, what's the process look like after? So you said after the first draft, is that when you're going through and seeing where you can work in a little more of the research?
Yeah, a little bit more of the research, but also really saying, are the things motivating the characters? Are the stakes high enough? Are things important enough to these characters? Does the connection here work, or actually is it better for this character to say that because of this reason? You know, it's really kind of making the web look nice and pretty and even and matched, but then also bringing in the idea of something that switches or changes that we didn't see, because you've got to be only a step ahead of your audience, and you certainly don't want to be behind your audience. So that's the trick at this stage, being like, well, did they know that was coming? Because if they did, I'm going to get rid of that whole scene, and who cares, we'll move quicker.
Podcast Captain's Log, May 29th, 2019. A couple years ago, I saw this documentary called Spectaculo. It was about this town in Italy where every summer they build a stage in the town square, and they put on a play about the various issues and goings on in the town that year. They call it autodrama, and that word always stuck with me because, creating art about your own life as a means of emotionally processing what's happening to you, it's kind of my whole thing. I always thought it was such a cool idea, and I'm kind of shocked to realize that the same thing is happening and then some already in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, like right down the street from my old apartment. So when I talked to Jessica Parker today, it was like your creative energy, your creative extrovertedness, your creative skills, they have applications outside of the places where you thought you had to put it. They have applications in more serious contexts, which, like, God, I always thought of my creativity as like a corporate liability. And I mean, it was when I was making videos with titles like The George Washington Carver of Jizz. That's a bad example because that video actually got me a gig. So that's one episode, that's one thesis. My creativity is not a corporate liability, or not necessarily. I probably don't want to use the word jizz in what's going to be one of the more respectable podcast episodes. Or do I? And I think that Catherine Stewart from the New Hampshire Theatre Project, I think she was kind of saying the same thing. The New Hampshire Theatre Project, they work with like corporate groups or old folks' homes. And they apply the creative skills to the real world settings and workshops and classes and shit. But what she was also saying was like the work itself, the impractical creative stuff, the fun show to go to on a Friday night, that helps too. That's powerful too. That's useful too. Especially when you do the follow through, like the applied part of the applied theater, which would probably be the title of the episode. You can get people to think about themselves and each other in a more profound way. And I think that's a good reminder for me as I try to rebuild my creative life in a new and more helpful way. The art itself can be the thing. The art itself can be the thing. Does that make any fucking sense?
So, I really believe in what Catherine and the New Hampshire Theatre Project are trying to do. I'm really engaged by the ideas they're putting forward. And Catherine just said that you don't want to be behind your audience. So I feel like if I tell you now that I'm getting more involved in this group, you'd probably say, yeah, well, duh, saw that coming. I won't tell you about it for now. You'll see. Thank you, Catherine Stewart. Thank you, Laurie Waltz-Gagnon. Thank you to Mackenzie Keefe. You just heard his song, You Are What You Wear, a couple of minutes ago. It's from his great album, Sumo, which is on Spotify. And Mackenzie, he'll be joining us next time on The Last Podcast, along with Tyler Mills and, of course, Morgan Little, for the triumphant return of Bright Eyes, Full Hearts Can't Lose, in which we will be discussing I'm Wide Awake, It's Morning. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.